Welcome to another episode of the Prepared School Psych Podcast. Today is a special episode because it is my 50th. And to be very clear, my 50th episode, not my 50th birthday. Shout out to my podcast team who does all of the work to get these episodes out. For the 50th episode, I wanted to share some resources with you. Free resources. Yes, I said free. And make sure you listen all the way through this episode because there is an exciting surprise waiting at the end. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. We looked at all of our data on the podcast so far. As a school psych, you know I love data. And we figured out which episodes have been your favorite so far. So I thought I would link the favorite episodes to the show notes in case you missed one, and then give you access to additional resources on these topics. Why free resources? First, you work really hard and you deserve some free things. Second, these topics are obviously important to you, so I want to give you more information about them. First up is the topic of requires special education. As we all know, the team must discuss whether the student requires special education and related services for all areas of eligibility. In this podcast episode, I talked about this and suggested that everyone take a look at their data. Take a quick listen to this clip. What I want to talk about today is the data that you have. The data you have from the referrals for the last couple of months, right? What are you noticing in regards to any themes? Are we still seeing a lot of learning issues? If so, are they reading? Are they math? We know COVID impacted math more than it did reading. Is that something we're still seeing to this day? We can say there's a lot more mental health concerns. Are you noticing any themes? Are you noticing anything for different grade levels that you work with? Because one of the things we are always thinking about when we get to that third prong, when we're sitting around that table and discussing as a team whether or not the student requires special education, is we know, unfortunately, at some of our schools, we have a lot of students that are behind. And so one of the things I always think about is, well, what about this particular student that we're evaluating? What about them makes you think that this student requires special ed? When we are examining whether a student requires special education, another term we often hear is need. The student needs special education. But what exactly does this mean? I did a deep dive into this topic in a live training session back in January 2024. In doing research for the session, I found that most states do not have very specific language on what precisely this means. I did find a few mentions of the following three things when discussing whether a student requires special education. Number one, does the student require a change in content, meaning the curriculum standards for the grade level are beyond what the student is able to participate in? This might be true for a student under the eligibility classification of intellectual disabilities, or a student with a significant learning disability in reading who needs significant support in prerequisite skills. Number two, does a student require a change in the delivery of instruction? Many students can get their educational needs met in the whole group or even small group settings that general education provides. But some of our students need more than that. So the first two were a change in content and a change in delivery. Number three, does a student require a change in instructional strategies? Our general education teachers are providing incredible support in their classrooms for all students, from using universal design for learning framework to make lessons more accessible for all students. Some students have needs that are beyond what is available in general education. This is when specially designed instruction may come into play. Remember, special education is supposed to be special. One of the resources we created from this January training was a document listing questions your team can discuss when they are unsure whether a student requires special education. Click the link in the show notes to access that handout. I hope you and your assessment team find it helpful. Now, what were other topics of interest to the listeners of this podcast? The next one is about being able to explain results succinctly. I actually have 2 podcast episodes on this topic, and you loved both of them. Why? We are always wondering what some great ways are to explain our evaluation results at the IEP meeting so that everyone around the table understands the findings and how this information supports or hinders the student in the educational setting. Here is a quick reminder from the podcast episode. Sometimes when we go to our meetings and we're explaining the information, what happens sometimes is we focus a lot on just the test results or the rating scales results. And we actually forget to just integrate in the multiple sources. So there's, of course, so many different ways that we can explain our information at meetings, right? I'm not here to say there's only one way to do this. Of course not. But in my mind, what I like to think about is as I'm writing the report, as I'm documenting all of the record review information and wherever I put my interviews and wherever I'm documenting my observation, all the input from the teacher, as I am going through, this is typically what I do through the proofreading process, that's usually when I'm taking some notes for myself about what are some themes that are emerging and where are my data sources aligning so beautifully. Now, this is an area I am always looking to improve upon for myself. One of the best strategies I have found has to do with summarizing the findings in the report. If I can summarize the findings in my report without using a bunch of jargon and subtest names and words like clinically significant and below average, I'm feeling pretty good. Here is an analogy I used in a podcast episode on this topic about jargon. I use this analogy sometimes because it helps me. I think about like when I go to the doctor and maybe I'm reviewing my yearly blood results or something, right? I am hoping that my doctor is going to explain any results that are fine in a very super Jenny friendly way, right? Like this is just super easy. Let me just kind of explain to you what I found here. But if there was a particular area that we needed to monitor or something that I maybe need to be concerned about, I would hope my doctor would give me the fancy word for it, right? Because what do I want to do? I want to go home and Google that and I want to put that in WebMD, right? Like all of us want to do and none of our doctors want us to do. But I think if it's that particular area of concern, I'd want to know what that jargony word is, but I really would like it, the person who's explaining to me that word and introducing that word to then explain it to me in a very parent-friendly way, or my doctor to explain something in a very Jenny-friendly way. But that's what I think about. That would be a place where I'd want to use that word out loud. But maybe all the things that were okay, maybe we can just talk about that in a much more parent-friendly way. I did a free workshop on writing a good summary just a few weeks ago. If you missed it and want to watch the replay, which includes numerous examples, click the link in the show notes. I hope you find it useful. And that workshop was not just for school psychs. If you have other assessment team members who might benefit from that workshop replay, share it with them as well. Now, last but certainly not least, the podcast episodes that are among the favorites for listeners were about dysgraphia and dyscalculia, or the other pronunciation of that word. I've heard this term pronounced 2 different ways. That's the only way my brain lets me pronounce it. Students who are struggling with reading and math skills. As we know, there are a lot of definitions of these terms swirling out in our world. Check out these 2 quick clips from the episodes about definitions for these words. The first thing that's going to be most important to ask is, what do you mean by this term? Because those can go in 2 very different directions, right? Am I going to be focusing on looking at motor skills, or am I going to be focusing looking at some of the other things that are important in being able to get our thoughts out on a piece of paper? Are we talking about attention issues, memory issues, executive functioning issues? So we want to make sure that we are doing a thorough evaluation, but based on the actual reason for referral. What is the specific reason why we're using this term dysgraphia? Before I start responding to, am I going to test this child for dyscalculia? What do you mean by that term, right? What are you noticed? What are you concerned about? That's going to be the important thing in my mind to start the conversation with. And then again, we need to think about how are we defining that word? So I know some states have a definition for dyscalculia, right? Many states have definitions for dyslexia. Not as many states have definitions for dyscalculia. So that would be the first question I would want to know if I was like newly arrived in a district. Does our state have a definition? Does our region have our definition? Does our district already discuss this definition? Like, how are we talking about this term here? And so if that isn't something that you're aware, if there's already been a decision about which kind of definition we're using, that is definitely one of the first questions I would want to have, that answer to there. So many of us have attended trainings on dyslexia, which is great since many of our referrals are about reading. Still, if you need more support regarding students who struggle with writing and math, I have a special offer for the first 50 psychologists who take advantage of this special offer. Last year in December 2023, I did a 2-hour training that I think ended up closer to 2.5 hours because there was so much I wanted to share on the topic of dyslexia, dysgraphia, and that math one. The training was created for school psychs and education specialists and speech and language pathologists. Those who didn't get a chance to sign up last year, but who wanted to catch the replay, typically pay $27 for this replay. But I am giving free access to this replay for free. Yes, I said free, for the first 50 people who want it. Just click on the link in the show notes to access it for free. Do this quickly to make sure you're one of the first 50 people. 50 podcasts in about 7 months. I hope you have found them useful, and I am so excited for the next 50. And remember, if you have a topic you would love for me to cover in an upcoming episode, head over to my website, jennyponzuric.com/podcast, and let us know. Until next time, everyone, thank you so much for being a listener, and I hope you have a great day. That concludes another episode of the Prepared School Psych Podcast. And I hope today's discussion equipped you not just with knowledge, but also the confidence to take action. Remember, every conversation we have and every resource we share builds a bridge towards a more inclusive and empowering learning landscape for our students. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful conversations and resources to support your journey. Share this podcast with colleagues. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder, everyone, the information and advice provided in this podcast are for guidance purposes only, and all listeners are required to follow both federal and state law and their own school district guidelines and policies. Thank you.